Thank you so much, Amira, for that quite powerful presentation. Yeah, I'm going to open for a Q&A, but maybe I'm going to just try to summarize, and I'm not going to do justice to everything you've said, but I'm hearing quite a few things. That one, participation takes many forms. There's once off around the table, but also journey that continues participation. That flexibility must be built into how we think about the built environment, because people's needs change. I'm also hearing, and I think this is what sort of speaking to me, that space is not neutral, right? There's politics and beliefs and values built into how we think, talk, see, engage, and plan spaces. And with that, then Amira says, how we plan cities also says something about how we see and think about the poor and their place in the city. Yeah, and then how do we, while we think about the built environment, how do we think through projects that translate concepts such as transformation, dignity, inclusion into real everyday projects that sort of bring all these things to life? And then I'm going to allow for you to ask questions, but maybe I'm gonna start off with my question. I'm gonna use this opportunity to have a mic. So I've done work around special justice, and I'm trying to think through that. But you said something powerful. I mean, my background has been protesting, activism, but you said something about how we need to continue the everyday grassroots activism, but also how we must also kind of take power and kind of play the game of power. How do we make sure that the conversations happening here speak to the conversation happening at the grassroots level, at the everyday activism struggle to say, let's make cities better? How does that need, that very urgent need on the ground, sort of gets translated to the high-level conversations and policy makings and all of those talks?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but I absolutely, you did get my talk, and I'm very honored by that. I think you mentioned the key elements in it, and I'm very appreciative that you listened so attentively. Thank you so much. So how do we do that? I deliberately told you my ideas around a wall tax, my ideas about denying development approvals unless you have shown or demonstrated that you have a mixed use with affordable housing included in it as possible tools. So that means when we are involved in activism on a daily basis, going and protesting at the decision makers' doors, we need to say, hey, this is what you can do. This is what you can do. Why does Menlyn not have affordable housing? I mean, it would be so easy. They've done a whole new redevelopment. Let's put a multi-story affordable housing. Then all the people that work in Menlyn can just, put in some proper schools and affordable clinics there in Menlyn. And so when we're doing activism, I think we also need to then, and that's where the collaborations across different professions come. So that would be my idea. Probably someone in education would have another idea. Someone in medicine would have another idea around healthcare. Because I don't believe that the people who work in Menlyn need to be shipped out late at night in minibus taxis after their kids are probably asleep, and yeah, it doesn't make sense. So we need to say, you know what, there's a plot of land here. Am I being naive? I actually don't believe that anyone that has done anything of significance in this world hasn't appeared a little bit naive at some point. I really don't. And I've read a lot of biographies and autobiographies, and sometimes I think people are a bit crazy. And that's why I was a little bit nervous about after the riots and the political complexities in South Africa, to start writing about let's do a wall tax. But I think it's important. And when you don't simply put a cycling lane for an area where there's just so many cyclists, you are telling something people about their worth. And that's so the activism needs to be collaborative across disciplines, and we need to go there with solutions, not just make a noise, but a noise with solutions. That would be my response.
I'm going to take 3 hands of people who have questions. 1, 2, 3 at the back, Johan.
I want to ask what I would consider to be, from experience, but a fairly rude question of the architects and the built environment people. How do you make the 3D animation a 3rd generation activation? In other words, how do you make your wonderful 3D dimensions, all the ideas that are designed into a mainland with social housing and all that, happen 3 or 4 generations later? Because that often seems to be the case. There's lots of wonderful drawings and wonderful animations and wonderful PowerPoints, but the sustainability of those into the future generations doesn't easily happen. And how do we make that happen? Let's say, how do we make it happen?
You've basically said what I was saying, but we're saying it in different words. Because I tried to explain the concept of open building, this international network that I also help lead. And it's all about who makes which decisions in a built environment when. So you'll have this fancy architectural practice that will do their designs today. They will go to site, they will build it. And then a few years later, it has to be completely renovated, completely. Let's say you're a social housing institution. You've built your housing according to the data that you have today. And then a few years later, people actually have a preference for studio rooms, or they have a preference for 3-bedroom units, or they have. So for you to even financially be viable as a social housing institution, your building stock needs to adapt. I hope I'm understanding your question correctly. And that's why if you're suddenly in a wheelchair and you don't want to move from your house needs to adapt. And if you build in the capacity for change, if you need more income and you need to change your garage into a shop, the house needs to allow you, that capacity for change can be built into the design. And that is my life's work, to be honest. And that's why I analyze existing social housing projects and say, hey, if you just shifted the staircase, this would have been sustainable for a lot longer. And that is ongoing participation, as opposed to what your need is today. What is your unknown need 10 years later that we could design for? I hope that answers you.
I'm asking, whose role is it to beautify our spaces? Is it the architect's role or is it the community's role? And if we as a community would like to beautify our spaces, I would love to see beautiful townships, because I understand not everyone in the township can move into the big city, and we've got apartheid architecture in all of our townships. I would love the townships to be beautiful. Am I naive to want that?
Yeah, like I said, I don't believe anyone that's done anything of significance hasn't appeared a bit naive at some point. So I embrace my own naivety in that sense. But no, I don't think you're naive at all. And I think it's a valid question. I don't think we should have townships. I heard a talk yesterday, it was quite inspiring, of 3 elderly architects, and they had an association many years ago when they weren't even allowed to study architecture, of the Association of Black Architects. And they were asking, why do you even call it township? Why is Linwood a suburb and Mamelodi is a township? That's like at a structural level. Why do we have townships? When I'm house hunting, why don't I come to your township and house hunt? Are the schools good? Are there facilities? Why is it a space for some people but not for everyone? And it's the same question I ask about why are the suburbs so low density, and why is there so much sprawl? So the same way that you want to fix the township and beautify it, which is a very noble thing, and we need to all beautify our spaces. I loved it. I think it was in one of Albisak's books. I can't remember which one. But when they had meetings during the struggle for the ANC, he said that one of the things that they always did was there would be a vase of flowers on the table when they were having those conversations. And it's just something that stuck, like even under those circumstances, you still beautify your space. So absolutely beautifying the townships, greening the townships. There was a storm and the trees were all over in my neighborhood, and the gardener was there, and I said to him, how is your neighborhood? And he kind of was quiet a bit, and then he said to me, Mom, you must remember we don't have trees, so we're fine. And I felt so embarrassed because our garden was a mess. So there should be no townships. That's the longer term vision. We should just have neighborhoods in a functional, integrated city. But definitely community mobilizing, definitely lobbying government to do more, because I see it also as a form of discrimination. And then, of course, there's all the talk around the tax base and where the money is coming from various areas, so then certain areas get disadvantaged. So all of that needs to be fixed. And but I'm kind of challenging you to think a little bit more in terms of what's this thing called a township, and why is it called a township? But let me go to the next question, and then maybe I'll remember, because I had another point I wanted to say. Maybe I'll remember it.
My question is that architecture, spatial design, and the built environment is a very structured and very formal institute. And at present, our spaces has become informal. We have informal settlements, we have informal traders, we have informal communities that move into dilapidated buildings and make it their own spaces. We have cyclists, like you mentioned. It's informal engagements. And my question to you is, how can we, as a society, as government, as architects, spatial designers, how can we normalize and formalize the informality of our society more? Because for me, our informal spaces is probably becoming our future spaces at present. How can we normalize and formalize our informality in society?
Thank you so much. I think the informal needs to be celebrated. I think the informal is an excellent indicator of where housing need is. You can do all the studies, unless it's in a really precarious location. I live on an estate, and I sit on this committee, and there was all this panic that right outside the estate an informal settlement had developed. And I said to them, but that's great, let's go speak to the city and assist the city to identify this as an affordable housing location, and we can help them design and build it. And why all the panic? It's like they've identified where it's close enough to live to all of these job opportunities. So for me, informality is a great indicator of housing need, and we need to respect that. We really do. So does that mean that we need to be 100% informal? No. So that is why, and I know the concept I'm presenting, I've studied it over many years, so it's quite complex, but that's why I talk about who makes which decisions when in a built environment. So even when you're being informal, maybe authorities could set up some structures whereby informal activities can happen, including construction activities. But that would happen within a level of control. And that is where the level of control is the collective decision making. It's what, so when they, or when people decide to inhabit a particular area, it mustn't infringe on my rights either. It mustn't infringe, or disturb my space. So how do we coexist? And that's how we can use the built environment very intelligently to coexist. So we need a level of control in the built environment that allows, and the control needs to be just to reach, and I speak about it in one of my podcasts, it just reaches a stage of control, not too much control. You plan to an extent, and then you let the informal processes take over. That means you won't have chaos, you won't have people infringing on each other's rights, and that's where government needs to intervene as a mediator. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But there's tools and mechanisms and finance systems that help allow for that to happen, which that's the kind of research and the precedents internationally that are being ignored because we're stuck on one way of doing things in this country. And I actually want to come back to the township thing because I wrote it down. I have a terrible memory, like 5 minutes and it's gone. So the townships and the suburbs and how our cities are structured, the sprawl and the low density. I might say, you know what, it's really not nice to travel long distances. My kids' schools are far away, or I have to travel far away for work and so on. But it has even more serious consequences. Every time I see new plans for small business development, I just know this is nonsense. You cannot have small businesses thriving in a low-density city. It's just, you need the feet that will serve those small businesses. You cannot have transport systems that work and function well. We go to Europe and we go where, and we love the transport systems. It's because they're compact cities. So you can't, in this sprawl, have a functioning transport network. You can't have a thriving small business environment. So it's all interlinked, and that's why the township is a problem in that sense. We need to fix the township, fix the suburb, and fix the gaps in between to better integrate the cities. And then, of course, crime plays a role in all of this. Or it thrives also because of these conditions, unfortunately. Thank you.
Cathedral is an extension of Anglican Church on the property in 1807. 1879. It continues to say, which was converted into a cathedral in 1909. That was after 30 years. Do you think this cathedral can be converted today?
It seems to be working very well as a cathedral, so. But absolutely. Absolutely, and I've been to places where such conversions have happened, and that is exactly what I mean about when I use the term open building, is that you design for capacity, you design for change. There's many churches now that are being converted into mosques and facilities for the Muslim community. I've been in a few because we sometimes host our Sudanese community events there, especially during Ramadan. So it's very funny because we have to put our prayer mats, like, you know, I'll be there, and the kids have discovered that these pews are amazing hide and seek. You know, it's like, and we have to pray on the sides because some of the spaces haven't been converted yet in Johannesburg. But we use it for our own religious ceremonies. So buildings have the capacity to change, and they do. And I'm sure the use of this space has changed over time. And we don't know what will happen to the community around this area. So it might become a mosque, it might become a residential building, and the whole idea is to build buildings with capacity. And when you build those buildings with capacity, you do it as a collective decision, and then they change internally around it. Those then become individual decisions, and that's where participation plays a role. Many buildings over many years have many lives. And residential building, when you design your whole social housing project based on a 2-room flat, if the market or the need or the demand changes after 10 years, and you've designed it in such a way where it's solid walls between the flats, you can't break into it, you can't subdivide it. So you, as the owner of the building stock, of the housing stock, as a social housing institution, you disadvantage yourself, and it doesn't make economic sense. So there's many, many reasons why we need buildings with capacity, in addition to absorbing and incorporating the informal systems into our processes. The key thing is to get people like organizations like the property owners associations on board. You know, that's or the big developers, or those are tricky. But I also find sometimes that communities don't 100% know what is the right solution. So that's another reason why I'm very cautious about participation. A planner, very well-known planner, David Dewar, said quite controversially, but I agree with him, that participation is not about asking people what they want, because people's expectations are experientially determined. If I've never lived in a transformed city where small businesses thrive, where the transport is easy and accessible, if I've never experienced that, if you ask someone what they want, they might just say, I want a 4-roomed house. Because you haven't demonstrated, and that's where the professionals come in, that's where government comes in. And that's where I really invite everyone to think very deeply about what we're demanding before we even start our activism. Because if we are still demanding single monofunctional houses in poorly located places with your own private yard, and it's a fully detached house, you are doomed, and so are your children and their children, in a perpetual cycle of poverty.